let's turn the page and let's talk about another guy that the Eagles took in last year's draft. This is a pick that I was extremely excited about in Kelee Ringo. I love Kelee Ringo. He was the number 24 player on my big board in the draft, and he fell out of day one entirely. He was a fourth round pick, I believe. They traded up and got him early in the fourth round, so fell out of day two entirely. And I was thrilled when the Eagles got him, and then I was frustrated all season long that James Bradbury and Eli Ricks continued to get reps over him. I wrote in my scouting report for him that I thought he really fit as like an outside corner in like a cover 3 type scheme, but I really thought he thrived in press coverage for the Eagles last year. And now you bring in Vic Fangio, who doesn't play a lot of press man, and in my head I'm like, are we about to Rasul Douglas this guy? And I hope not, but we'll get to a few stats for him, and then I'll throw it over to you guys. So last season, and again, it's in limited reps, Kelee Ringo did not qualify based on the minimum snap count of 300. There were 122 qualifying corners, but the ranks are where he fits had he qualified on the screen. So he played 185 snaps. He allowed a passer rating when targeted of 75.5, which is 52nd. His yards per coverage snap was 0.6, which ranked 14th. His success rate allowed was 37.5%, which ranks 25th. His broken tackle plus missed tackle percentage was 11.1, which was 34th. His average tackle depth, which isn't probably super important for a corner, but was 3.8 yards. And then if you look at his PFF grades, he was graded 65th overall in defense grade, 24th in run defense, 13th in tackling, and 70th in coverage. Now, coverage stats are really difficult. You probably shouldn't read into those too much because it's tremendously difficult for somebody watching a play to be like, oh yeah, that's who was targeted, that's who was at fault. And PFF grading notoriously doesn't take into account what happens on plays where corners aren't targeted. So you get some skewed things there. All that to say, I thought there were times that he looked really good, particularly in press man, which is not what I was envisioning as his primary usage. Nick, what did you see from Ringo in year one? And how do you see him fitting into a loaded cornerback room this year with the Eagles investing first and second round picks into the position as well?
Yeah, so where I think he really got to work on his press coverage skills was when he was playing on the punt return team. Because if you go back and if you're a nerd like me and you go back and watch all these special teams plays as well, you can see he was like erasing guys. There's a big reason why their special teams got a lot better, especially their punt return team. He was erasing guys, and it's essentially like he was sitting there in press coverage the whole time. So he was working on this stuff all season long to begin with, and you could see that really translate and carry over once he did get on the field. I think whether or not he starts this year, I don't know, but I think in the long-term plan, if we go into the year next year where you have in your sub package where you have DeJean at nickel and then you have Mitchell and Ringo on the outside, I think that's something I could really get behind. This guy's athletic traits are off the chart. Add with it his size at the position, which is uncanny. He has all the traits to really be one of those top-end players at his position, and there's a reason why A.J. Brown was talking about him with all-pro caliber skills. I think he's best in... I think he can play off coverage and be a good player and that kind of scheme, and I think it really fits in well with what Fangio likes to do and how he likes to play his coverages. He's more of a match cover 3 or a lot of match coverages, which play out very similar to cover 1. The times when I saw him playing like true zone coverage and cover 3, there was times where he would, a lot of times you see this with younger players, a lot of times they just get depth because they don't want to get beat, and then they allow a lot of underneath stuff. But when he was playing more of the match coverages, it's more of a man technique style, and he was a lot more patient with his footwork and his back pedal. He would trust his speed, and that's a huge thing. A lot of times these guys are just flipping and opening their hips too early and just give up stuff underneath. And when they were playing more of those match style coverages, he was a lot better. He was a lot tighter in his coverage. The play he had against DK Metcalf, that was incredible tape. great teach tape right there. Everything from his eyes to his footwork to his hand placement when he wants to secure the tackle and then try to knock the ball out is great stuff to see. And you really want to see those flashes from younger players, because at the end of the day, a lot of these guys can make plays, but it's about building consistency, and we want to see, can they reach those heights? And I think we see a lot of plays where you see, okay, this guy could be really good if he just is more consistent with stuff. I think a big reason why we didn't see him a lot earlier in the season is like if you go back and watch the Cardinals game, there's times where Reed Blankenship's sitting there having to tell him where to go before the play. I mean, it's just tough to throw a guy on the field if it like he's not able to figure out, am I traveling with this guy across the formation when they motion, or where's my run fit if they bring in a nub formation, or they use a nub tight end, which essentially forces the corner into the run fit. Is like a lot of the little stuff of understanding where he needed to be, but that's what happens a lot with rookies and why a lot of times they don't play early despite being better athletes than some of the vets ahead of them. So I think with another year under his belt, you can really start to see his athleticism shine a lot more when he's not having to think so much about what he needs to do.
All right, Eric, what were your thoughts on Kelee Ringo, initially, with some time removed now, and how do you think he could fit into the Eagles' plan for 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, when we talked about him on the Philly Film Room podcast, I kept saying, why did he drop to the 4th round? Because you go back and he looked a lot better than that, probably like a 2nd round talent. And I assumed it was because he was terrible in run fits, because he's like, almost 6'2" and runs a 4.3. And then I watched and I was like, no, he actually is really aggressive coming up and is a sound tackler. He has like quite a bit of heft to him. I think he's pushing 210. So it's not like he's a stick figure. I think, maybe a little bit mismatch in the scheme fit. As Nick mentioned, he's probably best suited as press man. And this is one of the reasons probably AJ Brown highlighted what he thinks his potential is, because there's not a lot of guys who have the size, speed to be able to actually press him effectively. So he's like, oh man, this guy's a unicorn out there in practice. Now there is a logjam out there. Ringo to me would be starting on probably 15, 20 NFL teams, but just because they have so many other capable starters, he probably won't start. But yeah, I love his potential. I think it's back to what Nick said, just making sure that he knows his assignments, alignments, and all like the checks and stuff at the line is probably why he didn't get more playing time, because Bradbury, it was pretty obvious halfway through the season that he was cooked. So I understand, Shane, your frustration of why he didn't get on the field. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but he did show some really good reps against Mike Evans. And I had always thought of this is the guy who, if you are going to occasionally do matchup-based coverages, which I know that's not a big part of Fangio's scheme, but from time to time, maybe you'll see it. He could follow those Alpha X receivers and take them away.
Yeah, there was, I think a lot of people just, me included, once that Buccaneers game was over, it was like, I'm not watching this film. But then when I eventually went back to watch it again, they were pretty much shadowing Mike Evans with Kelee Ringo, especially on 3rd downs. He had some help some plays, other plays he didn't, but I think that just showed you that what the coaching staff really thought about him, and especially at that point in the year, like really throwing him out there and seeing what we have as we go into the next season. I think it showed a lot of trust in him and what he's able to do.
All right. Jonny, you and I spoke a little bit about Ringo during the season, but it's been a while, and if I'm honest, I don't even remember what you said back then. So what are your thoughts on Kelee Ringo heading into 2024?
Yes, I remember I said you were one of the. I thought I had him as high as anyone, and then you told him you were like 22nd on your board or something, and I realised I actually wasn't. I said that I'd probably taken him at 30. So I had like a late first round, early second round grade, and I obviously got that wrong because the NFL disagreed with me big time. Like, he's just a ridiculously good athlete, sprinter speed. I think he even was a sprinter. I'm desperately trying to remember my notes from last year. But I'm sure he ran like a 100-meter sprint in something ridiculous when he was in college. Really big, really physical, and not just somebody who's raw, like can play the ball in the air, can carry routes down the sideline, like vertical speed, athleticism, it's all there. The concern I had was two things, really. I felt at times he was a little stiff. Pre-draft, I worried. Basically, my biggest concern was when he was in out-and-out man-to-man coverage and he had to follow receivers running inside, which is why actually I really like him. And Nick, you mentioned like a free match style defense where he can pass off receivers when they run inside. I don't think you really want him like running across the field with like drag and inside slants, etc. I think you sort of want him to stay outside. He's very young. So I remember that being one of the reasons I was shocked that he fell, was I'm pretty sure he was only 21 during the season as well. So I think like you guys mentioned, like the potential was really there. Like, I'm really excited. I do recall in college, I remember writing about how he was quite boom bust. Like, I think Cedric Tillman got the better of him a lot. I think sort of there were reps when I expected him to be better in press coverage and maybe he wasn't as clean as I'd hoped. And I think that's probably one reason why he didn't play as much last year as we hoped. I think the biggest thing for him would be scheme fit. Like, I think the Eagles last year drafted a number of like press corners outside. They didn't just draft them, they also signed like guys like Greedy Williams. And I guess they were going to play a slightly different scheme. And then they ended up not really pressing a great deal. And it just seemed like a little bit of a mismatch. We know the whole defense went wrong. It felt like personnel and scheme did not align by the end of the season. So we didn't really get to see him that much. I'd like to have seen him a little bit more. But I don't really care if he plays this year. I'm going to be honest. I like Darius Slay more than others. They've obviously drafted the first round corner, who everyone's very excited about, and I expect him to play. And even DeJean may end up on the outside in future years. So I'm not that fussed about this year. If he is sort of CB3, CB4, Eric mentioned that you can use him in certain matchup situations if you want. Players will get injured. He will get his time eventually. So I'm excited to watch him. I think he's still got a little bit to do, but you'd expect that from a fourth round pick. But I think similar to Jalen Carter, I guess, potential-wise, he's got it all. Like, you can really, really see a top-level corner there. And I think Eric's right. For a lot of teams, he would start just because of his sheer size, sort of size, strength, athleticism sort of combination. I think for him, it will come down to, as I said, it will come down to scheme fit and opportunity. And it may be that it takes him a little bit of time to break through because of the cornerback room. But he's not someone that I'd give up on long term. I think he could end up, it might just take a year or two until we really sort of see his full potential.
Yeah, you mentioned the track speed. When he was a junior in high school in Arizona, he won state in both the 100 and 200 meter dash. So definitely comes from that track background. And we've talked about the scheme fit and how, he worked really well in press man coverage. And Vic Fangio doesn't run a lot of that. It's a lot of split field coverages and things. But one thing you do end up with a lot of times, especially against like 3x1 sets, is you can isolate a corner in one-on-one man coverage against that single receiver, and it allows you to cheat the safeties over and things, and basically stealing an extra defender for the other side. And I do think that's a role that Ringo could do quite well, especially matchup dependent on who the isolated receiver is. If it's a Mike Evans, if it's a Travis Kelce type guy potentially isolated on the back, I think you could do that with Kelee Ringo some. Now, obviously, you don't know that that's what they're going to do before they break huddle, and so you've got to be comfortable with him on the field and in all facets. But I want to show one play for Ringo that I had posted on Twitter last year. He's at the bottom of the screen, and I think it's something that you could see. Fangio likes to do a lot of quarter half type coverages, and that's what the Eagles are in here with Ringo at the bottom of the screen. And he carries this route vertically. He press bail, carries it a little vertically, and then gets back to the flat and makes a tackle. And I also think that's a role that you could see Ringo in, as sort of that flat defender. And again, you got to be able to do a little bit of everything. You can't just put him out there to say, okay, we know you're going to be the flat defender in a quarter half. Like, you can't do that. You've got to be able to do everything. But those are some things that I think that he could really thrive at situationally to get him on the field a little bit. I do, however, think, especially with Isaiah Rodgers and drafting Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, and you bring Avonte Maddox back, I do think there's going to be limited opportunities for him this year, barring injury, but I do think he figures heavily into the Eagles' future. So anybody else have anything?
Yeah. I'm glad you showed that play because just it's so funny going back and watching film last year, and there's just night and day difference how much faster he was closing space, especially on like screen plays, on run plays when he had to crack replace and fill downhill. He was much quicker closing space than Bradbury was, and he was much more aggressive and physical. This defense was missing that last year for most of the year. I think he brings that in spades, and it especially helps with how big he is as a player. He's definitely an outlier with his size. It's just he brings something that they didn't have for most of last year. So I'm really excited to see him not only improve in their pass defense, but improve in the screen game and the tackling game and the physical part of playing the position.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonny, did you start to say something? Did you have something else you wanted to throw out about Kelee Ringo before we move on?
No, I was just going to blame your bad hosting skills for just ending a point, and I had no idea whether it was a question or not. That was all. So no, I'm good.
Fair.
I'm good with Ringo. I'm happy to move on when you are.
Okay, Eric, anything else before we move on?
Yeah, last thing I'd mention. In like, let's call it 3rd and medium to 3rd and 10 situations, a lot of NFL offenses like to run a 3-by-1, but on the backside, they'll have a tight end, because often it forces the defense to decide if they want to do a matchup-based coverage or if they're just going to stick their corner out there. And the benefit with Ringo is you can just leave him there no matter what, and you don't tip off your coverage. And so it's nice to have guys with like size, speed, and some physicality. So I could see, in the future, if he develops into a starting corner, you have like a potentially lethal 3rd down defense, because last year that was their bugaboo. I looked it up recently. Their 1st down defense was fairly, I think, middle of the pack, maybe even a little above that. And then they got to 3rd down, they'd go into these man coverage looks, and like it would be Morrow, the slot corner, or Bradbury, obviously, just getting roasted continually. So just want to add that little nugget.